Hello, and welcome back to Transforming Classroom Grading Practices in conjunction with Eastern Washington University and Excel Education Resources. We are about to embark on Unit 4, Who Grades? In Unit 1, we talked about why we grade. And in Unit 2, we went into detail about what we grade with regard to learning targets and proficiency scales. And we also did that in the context of multi-tiered systems of support and effective Tier 1 instruction. In Unit 3, we tackled the complex issue of when and how do we grade. So we get to end our journey on transforming classroom grading practices with probably the most fun unit of them all, which is Who Grades? Incorporating students as our assessment partners and beginning to set up your classroom system of grading. So here we go. Again, Module 1, students as assessment partners. Module 2, setting up your transformed classroom grading system. Module 1, students as assessment partners. In this unit, we revisit motivation and mindset. How do we help students change their mindset about fixed versus flexible traits? How do we mitigate the neural downshift? How do we develop students with flexible mindsets so they are more likely to take intellectual risks? And how do we engage students as partners in the assessment process? As Costa and Kallick tell us, we must constantly remind ourselves that the ultimate purpose of education is to have students become self-evaluating. If students graduate from our schools still dependent on others to tell them when they are adequate, good, or excellent, then we have missed the whole point of what education is about. So in revisiting grading and motivation, Kathy Voderet tells us we must acknowledge how traditional grading practices obstruct the learning process, damage motivation, and cause teachers and students to fixate on grades to the detriment of learning. In revisiting assessment for learning, Stiggins reminds us we must assess accurately and use results effectively in order to make sure students react productively to the assessment results. He suggests that productive responses to assessment from students should be, I understand these results. I know what to do next. I'm okay, and I choose to keep trying. Students as assessment partners really isn't all that complicated. What it simply means is that students will understand the learning targets for the unit of study or the quarter, and they know where they are relative to the proficiency scale that goes along with that target or targets. This would be a very simple example of where students are keeping track of how they're doing with probability and keeping track of the different pieces of evidence that they are providing along the way. Just to note that there's no one right way to set up formats for students to chart and monitor their progress, but there will be a lot of examples in this unit. This is an example of a school that decided to have students set their goals toward their Smarter Balanced math results. One of the things I really like about this example is, number one, they have made it into a 2-day advisory lesson where students look at each one of their grade level results and then use those to set their goals. The other thing I really like about this example is that you will see on the right-hand side that students are not only paying attention to are they level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4, but they clearly know what the scale score ranges are for 6th, 7th, and 8th, and they know that those scale score ranges are moving. For those of you who have done DIBELS, it's the same sort of idea that the benchmarks change as you move up through the grade levels. So students are clear about their scale score ranges. They also know that they may start as a really low level 1, but there's much to be celebrated when they become a high level 1. And there's a lot more we can talk about that that has more to do with teachers and students being data literate. This is just an example of if you happen to use interim assessment blocks or any other test where you use it as a pre or a post. It could be iReady, it could be MAPS, whatever. But the idea here is that not only would students monitor their own progress on an interim assessment block, but the whole class could monitor it together as a community of learners. So, for example, this was a classroom that took this assessment on October 14th. You could see that 51% of the students were below, 13% were above. But by December 13th, only 13% of the class were below and 50% of the students were above. So you can utilize your whole class in charting and monitoring progress. As you're using these pre and post tests, particularly in pre-tests, these are some key questions you might have students discuss as a class. What were my strengths and areas for growth on this unit pre-test? What is my plan for progress? What are my goals? But as a class, why did we do well on this problem? Or why did we struggle on that problem? And have them in teams discussing different information about this specific problem. Once they understand where their strengths and their weaknesses might have been, then that's where you can share the proficiency scale. In this case, I'm going to give an example of geometry. Well, this happens to be expressions and equations, but the idea is that you can use a proficiency scale such as the connections playlist, and students can say, okay, I'm below. What do I need to work on? I'm above. What do I need to work on? Or what about as a whole class? This can also help you set up small groups that you might work with that might be struggling simply with the idea of the distributive property, for example. What does that even mean? This is another fabulous example of students as assessment partners and really gives us some pause to think about something. So for many, many years at this particular middle school, very few students reached level 4 on the English language proficiency assessment. When they incorporated the top part of this growth goal setting chart, they went from very few, like maybe 2 students, to 14 meeting standard in 1 year, getting to level 4. Here's the interesting part. The next year, they decided to add that color-coded proficiency scale at the bottom. And that year, 45 students in 1 year met level 4 proficiency. So there's something about the color coding along with the proficiency scale that is potentially powerful for learners. So that is something else you might want to consider. Students could do SMART goals. I know some teachers, this is from a teacher's classroom, who has their students not just set their goals, but they set SMART goals. And they try to get them to be very specific about what their plan is. Again, students can monitor their growth in any content area. A proficiency scale is going to have basically 4 levels. 1, little to no evidence. 2, partial evidence, typically the easier things, but still struggling with more difficult concepts. Level 3, descriptor proficient. That is where you're going to have a lot of specificity around the success criteria and even provide examples or exemplars. And then once again, that 4 is thorough understanding, where they can take that level 3 proficiency, whatever it might be. It could be in welding, and they are actually now able to apply it in a new and novel real world scenario. Again, you'll notice no evidence at the bottom. So rather than simply telling a student you got a 0 or an F, I'm sorry, we don't have any evidence. So provide us some evidence so we can get a sense of where you're at. That could also be a very positive strategy to use for student-led conferences. Students can also monitor their progress together, as we've mentioned. This activates students as a community of learners who support one another and also builds growth mindset. Students learn that they can contribute to their school's success. This happens to be a great picture of a classroom where the teacher has the reading and the math targets as flowers, and the students are moving up as ladybugs up the flower stem to their target. Here's an example of another classroom where the teacher has the reading, writing, and math targets very clearly spelled out there using levels 1, 2, and 3. And then the students all have their name on a star. And so every day, every week, as students are demonstrating their evidence, they get to move their own stars up. And it becomes quite a celebration for the whole class. I've just shared some examples where students monitor their progress by target. But you could also have students monitor their progress through a unit of study once you have clarity around what those targets are. Here are some examples. The one on the left has to do with sixth grade ancient civilizations. You'll notice there's a lot of reading for history and writing. And also embedded in it are the standards for ancient civilizations from Washington State Social Studies. The one on the right is variables and patterns, just to give an idea that these are the targets for variables and patterns, and students are charting and monitoring their way and can see the date of the evidence. Take note of the very right-hand side of this particular tracking sheet with a handwritten in 7.5, whatever it is. One of the things that this team of teachers discovered is that students really did not understand equality. In the previous unit of study, they were working on standards around equality and equations. When they could tell that students still really didn't have that, they were able to take that particular target and bring it forward into the next unit of study so they didn't quit working on it. I don't know about you, but as a teacher, it never felt good to know I was leaving a unit and moving to another, and I still had this group of students, or maybe a large number of students, who still didn't have some of the targets under their belt. This way, we can figure out which target students are still struggling, pick it up and bring it into the next unit, and maybe have it be entry tasks or exit slips or something we work on once a week, but we never quit working on it. That is another benefit of monitoring student progress by unit and being clear about your targets, because you can always bring a target from a previous unit into the present. Here's another example. This happens to be 8th grade geometry, of which there are 3 main learning targets from Common Core and Smarter Balanced: Target G, Target H, and Target I. So the students are very clear. Here's where it is, probably on the board as well. They know there's a pretest. There's going to be different summative assessments along the way that go with each unit or each chapter or each lesson. And then there's a summative and a post-test. This would be another way that students could organize it. But on the back side of this tracking sheet is the unit proficiency scale. So as students know where they're starting, even if they're at the beginning, a teacher could even say, hey, we just took a pretest. We're all below. We're all at the beginning. No worries, because we are going to really work on these things at level 1 this week. But by Friday, we've got to be working up into the yellow. And in some schools where very few students reach proficiency, students get quite motivated knowing, oh, this is what I need to do. Oh, we've got a plan. We're all going to work on this together. So keep that in mind as well. Once again, you could also use the connections playlist for geometry as another way that kind of simplifies how this might look. And again, you can hand these out to students, but I do recommend you do it in color. This is an updated connections playlist that is very specific just to congruence and similarity, and really only gets at target G for that 8th grade mathematics target. Student target tracking sheets can be simple. This one comes from a 4th grade classroom from long ago, but you can see it's fairly simple. Or it could be more complex. This happens to be from a high school mathematics teacher. One of the things that's very cool about this example, as you can see what the target is up there at the top, the level 1, 2, 3, 4 descriptors. But then this teacher has really set up clearly what the evidence is that will be required. And every Friday or any day a student says, hey, I am ready to provide my evidence to the class, they have evidence days and students get up and provide their evidence publicly that they are good to go on this particular target. Again, revisiting level 4 evidence. Level 3 describes proficiency. Level 4 applies that proficiency to a new and novel real-world scenario. What if we allowed student voice and choice and let students determine what their level 4 evidence might be? Please pause this presentation and link yourself to this video by Myron Dweck, in which how he asks, how can assessment empower students? See you in a minute. Thank you for taking time to take a look at that video by Myron Dweck. I think this is a place where we can really begin to realize equity when we allow student voice and student choice in the kinds of evidence they will provide for us around level 4 achievement. How motivating might it be if a student knows, hey, as long as I can demonstrate that I'm at level 3 and my teacher has a plan, we're all working on it together, then I can choose something completely of my own thinking and creativity to provide it. For example, ratio and proportion, a student could design a quilt, or another student could talk about the importance of ratios in repairing an engine or in building a house or designing a house. So this could be a really effective way for us to realize equity and close gaps with our students. So thanks again for taking a look at that video and thinking about that. Now, I know that sometimes it becomes very difficult to figure out how you're going to keep track of all of this. And of course, there's the good old notebook and paper and pencil and colored crayons and all of that. But in one school, Quincy Middle School, they have begun work on students monitoring their assessment and goal tracking in a digital notebook. This is just a beginning mock-up of it. And there will be tabs along the side, again, all digital, where they're going to keep track of things. And again, this would be whatever is in the context of your classroom. This is not the only way to do it, but the idea that you could have a digital notebook. So regardless of whether we're having to teach remotely or we're all together, if we had something digitally, it might be a lot more manageable. We can really develop a community of learners through effective grading practices. I love this wall here because this teacher has laid out all of the math targets for the year on that thermometer, and the students are keeping track of where they are as the whole class is moving up and reaching their goals. Again, the depth of knowledge is clear, the targets are clear, it's written in I can statements. And I want to just come back to some of the research around effective grading practices and students as assessment partners. We've talked about Hattie, I believe it was in Unit 1 or Unit 2. And what we know is that he has thousands of research studies now in which he has done meta-analyses. And 0.4 effect size is equal to a year of growth. And you will see that in 2018, the top 2 effective instructional strategies used by teachers per the research was a development of collective teacher efficacy and student self-reported grades. Now, he wishes he wouldn't have called it self-reported grades because it's much more than that. It's, again, the strategies and the concepts we've been talking about throughout this course. And that is that students are very clear about the targets, the scales, and they're able to monitor their own progress and set their goals. If 0.4 equals 1 year's growth, how much growth might we get from an effect size of 1.57 in collective teacher efficacy and 1.33 with students' self-reported grades? I want to just bring this research up again because although it's talking about collective teacher efficacy, meaning teachers coming together and believing together they can really make a difference for student learning, I'm wondering about this self-reported grades and students as assessment partners and the impact for collective student efficacy. So please be thinking about that with me, because what if we, through these transformed grading practices that support student learning and equity, we really are ending up building student collective efficacy? As Fisher and Fry tell us in the principle, assessment-capable learners know their current level of understanding, know where they're going and are ready for the challenge, select tools to guide their learning, seek feedback and see errors as opportunities. There's that growth mindset. Monitor their progress and adjust their learning. They also recognize their learning and they teach and support others. Again, that community of learners. Pause this presentation and link to this article titled Assessment Capable Students. This article could be one that you're going to utilize for yourself, but one of the things that this photo, even though it has a lot of stuff on it, communicates to us is that at this school, the 4th and the 5th grade teacher in the hallway are both teaching point of view at the same time, have common learning target, common learning goals, and they are providing evidence and exemplars out in the hall for when kids are going into the classrooms. This assessment capable student article might be one that you want to share with your grade level team or your department, or maybe even your administrators, because it might be a good entry into having this discussion about students as assessment partners. Take a moment, find this article, and we'll see you in a minute. As we finish Module 1, reflect and write on your module reflection sheet. How will you and your students frequently progress monitor their learning using high-quality student evidence? How will you and your students use formative assessment as a feedback to further learning? How will you engage students as your assessment partners, and how might you provide student voice and choice in determining Level 4 evidence as they apply Level 3 proficiency to a new and novel real-world scenario? Again, pause this presentation and take some notes. Module 2. This is the final module in our course, Transforming Classroom Grading Practices. This module, we are going to consider how you begin to set up a classroom system. As This author tells us if schools prioritize student needs, we would design a very different grading system. It would be one that motivates students, one that helps them understand their strengths and areas for growth, and one that prepares them for the world outside the classroom. Such a grading system would also be one for equity. As Joe Feldman tells us, by creating a system that transforms our grading practices, we can realize 3 pillars of equitable grading, in which grades become accurate, bias-resistant, and motivational. So let us continue to transform our grading practices so that we lift the veil of grading for each and every learner so they know how to succeed. Again, our grading practices should not be a mystery. We want to lift the veil off of grading so that each and every learner is very clear about how to succeed in their schooling and learning. So how do you set up your classroom grading system? Do you organize student evidence by learning targets? Do you and students have clarity on the proficiency scale and level 3 success criteria? Together, are you analyzing exemplars? Do you provide frequent various formative assessments and provide feedback on those targets via the proficiency scale? Do you and students have a shared understanding of how frequent progress monitoring informs next steps for learning? That's going to inform what you need to do as a teacher for individual students and the whole class, and what students need to do for themselves. And do you and students have a shared vision for organizing student evidence to frequently monitor progress in a unit of study? Please note that I continue to reference all student work as evidence of learning. There are other people and other schools who have embarked on this same journey, and it is to your benefit to find out who they might be and how they have done this journey. This happens to be an example of one school that has a full grading and reporting handbook and how they've set up their report cards. There is not just one right way to do this work. What the right way to do this work is to be clear about why you grade, what we grade, when and how we grade, and engaging students in the process. As we end Module 2, Reflect and Write, what is your plan for setting up your own classroom grading system? How will you and your students frequently progress and monitor their learning using high-quality student evidence? How will you and students use assessment as feedback to further the learning? How will you engage students as your assessment partners? And how will you provide student voice and choice in determining level 4 evidence? Pause this presentation, take a few moments to reflect. We now come to the end of the course, Transforming Classroom Grading Practices. In Unit 4, there are 2 different assignments. The Unit 4 assignment is Who Grades? So utilizing your reflections, the literature review, and scenario handouts from Units 1 through 4, use the unit planning template you used for Units 2 and 3, but now focus specifically on Steps 6 and 7. Remember, in Unit 2, you worked on Steps 1 through 4. In Unit 3, you worked on Step 5, and now you're going to be working specifically on Steps 6 and 7. You are going to provide examples of how students will chart and monitor their progress toward the unit learning targets via the proficiency scale for the 3 units of study that you have already been working on in Units 2 and 3. Another question you're going to ask yourself is, how will you incorporate student voice and choice in determining level 4 evidence? Once again, here is the 7-step unit planning template example that I provided, but again, you may have created your own or chosen a different type of template. The bottom line is it has these steps over on the left on it. And for steps 6 and 7, you will see the specific assignment that you have for this particular unit. And you have a final project. This is the end all be all of this course. What will a transformed grading system look like in your classroom? What you're going to do is, again, review all of the work you've done in units 1 through 4, whether they're reflections or whether they're your assignments. You are going to develop a plan for creating and implementing a classroom system which applies the concepts you have learned in this course. Please communicate that plan by writing a final 3 to 5 page paper describing your transformed grading system using the project rubric provided on the next slide. So for this final project, describing and communicating the classroom system for transforming grading practices that you will implement, you are going to provide an introduction and a section that just sets forth the need for transforming grading practices and provide any relevant research and educational literature that has led you to that understanding. You're going to also describe the structural outline of your classroom system that will transform grading practices. Again, this could be very specific to you, or it may be something you want to discuss with your team. This paper will also address how your system that you will be developing is a shift to a J curve and avoids practices that distort achievement, inappropriate grade calculations, and low quality or poorly organized evidence. How will you ensure that you have those in your effective grading system? And also, it addresses how you will engage learners as assessment partners. And of course, pay attention to your organization, language and vocabulary, and conventions. Your students are so lucky to have you as their teacher. Thank you so much for your courage in engaging in transforming classroom grading practices that support student learning and equity. This course has been in conjunction with Eastern Washington University and Excel Education Resources. We want to thank you for contributing to our profession of teaching and learning. We encourage you to share what you have learned with your colleagues and school leaders. Once again, thank you for having joined us in this courageous journey towards transforming classroom grading practices.